With degrees in criminal justice and ethics, over 30 years of investigative experience, a recognized expert in investigation procedures, and an expert in criminal and social behaviors, I am Rick Decker, and this is A Shadow of Truth. Before we get this episode started, I just want to take a minute and remind everyone to please like and share the show with your friends and family. Depending on what platform that you're on, the links will be in the description. Thank you. No one ever really knows where danger may lurk. Today, we're going to be talking about the real estate killer of South Carolina, Todd Kohlhepp. So, Todd Kohlhepp, a realtor, inconspicuous, stealthy, but with a history of violence and what ultimately turned out to him to be was deadly. So the first question, a guy has to ask is, how does somebody like that pass a background check to become a realtor? The first thing is that, particularly in South Carolina, is that up until 2 years ago, background checks were really just limited to where you had lived previously over the last 10 years and locally to the state. So they were just state by state checks. And sadly, after this event, and I can only speak for South Carolina, um, they didn't really do federal checks. And in fact, when I moved down to South Carolina 13 years ago, I was told by the state law enforcement division that their records didn't sync up with federal records. So they just were limited to checking to the state. And in Todd's case, he had juvenile offenses and they were in Arizona. And while he was incarcerated, he was a nightmare because you'll find out later he was incarcerated as a child. But the minute he turned 20, he quit acting out. So there were no adult infractions on him for his violent behavior that would pop up. So who was Todd Kohlhepp? Well, Todd was born in Florida. He was raised in between Georgia and South Carolina by virtue of his parents' divorce. His parents divorced when he was a toddler. About a year or so later, his mom remarried, and Todd had some difficulty with the transition. He and his stepdad's relationship was not good. At an early age, Todd became very problematic for his mother. He had often told his mom, like so many young men do in so many divorce situations, I want to go live with dad. I want to be with my biological father. I don't want to be here under the tyrannical rule of a new man that's not my dad. That happens a lot in divorce cases. And at that time, Todd's mom just told him no because she was granted custody. As time went on, when Todd was about 9, I think is what they had indicated on my research, that he had very explosive behavior and he had an unusual preoccupation for a child that age with sex. Now, during this phase of his life living with his mom, he escalated to harming animals, shooting them with a BB gun. And in fact, once he mixed Clorox bleach in a fishbowl full of goldfish, and he was having difficulty acclimating with peers. He got in trouble with school and he was acting out and violent with his classmates. All this behavior, as one can imagine, garnered him a visit to a psychiatric facility in Georgia. He had some relevant anger issues and, probably most likely caused, like we talked about earlier, about the divorce. His biological parents separated, divorced. His mom remarried. His dad just went off to Arizona and had very little contact with this kid. And ultimately, the mom and stepdad divorced. So here we have Todd, a product of two broken marriages. This kid's entire youth was in constant shambles. Now, eventually, Todd's mom gave in and said, okay, listen, um, go live with your dad, and sent him off to Arizona. With that happening, we would think that the rebellion would stifle or maybe even just completely stop because Todd got his wish. But dad was kind of a mess too. I mean, dad's hobby was making bombs. So he taught Todd how to make bombs and how to blow crap up. Now, Todd's dad also collected weapons. I don't want the NRA people to get bent out of shape here. I'm all for people collecting weapons and the right to bear arms. However, there is a difference between collecting and stockpiling. And as an investigator, I have seen people over my career that were collecting, quote unquote, but had turned out to actually been stockpiling. And there is a difference. And that's exactly what Todd ultimately did. He wasn't collecting, he was stockpiling. In fact, he was not able to get weapons himself. He had developed a ring of people who were convicted, by the way, for buying weapons for him and giving them to him. So Todd had all this going on in his life. Okay. And at 15, Todd kidnapped at gunpoint a 14-year-old girl. He took her to his daddy's house, bound, gagged her, and raped her. Now, you would think, well, where's Todd's dad? Well, Todd's dad was gone and traveled a lot for whatever reason and left Todd to the care of his girlfriends, whoever that woman would have been at that particular time. So he had no consistency or stability in his life. Anyway, after he raped this girl, he walked her home and told her, if you tell anybody, I will kill you and them. So subsequently, Todd was arrested and convicted. He served 14 years for that crime as a juvenile and was a registered sex offender. After he was released, he relocated from Arizona to South Carolina. He came home to familiar stomping grounds. During his time in Arizona, his incarceration, there were evaluations. And in fact, some of my research I saw where the court in Arizona and the probation official had said Todd had an above IQ, but was diagnosed with borderline personality disorder, and he could never, ever be rehabilitated. Todd had a good defense attorney. That attorney disagreed and convinced the court in probation that Todd was no longer a threat to society and could be rehabilitated. So when this story broke about a year and a half, 2 years ago, here in South Carolina, um, Todd had held a woman in a steel storage container on a property that he owned, and her husband was found in a shallow grave on that property. Todd had met them and, on a ruse, told them, well, listen, I'm a realtor. I have properties that need to be cleaned and need to be taken care of. And he told these people he would hire them to help clean up the property and then he would subsequently pay them. So, which brings us back to, how did he become a realtor? Well, we talked about how the state and federal records weren't really merged at the time, but Todd just bided his time. He came to South Carolina. He was very smart. He went to school, he earned degrees, he started building a new life. He kept quiet. He did everything on the down low, just lived a normal life, which made it easier to conceal his juvenile convictions. Remember, records weren't merged at that time. Okay. And because there was no record of violence in jail after his 18th or 20th birthday, nothing popped up. The only psych evaluation that was done was when he was 16, and it cited his issues being based off of parental abuse with personality disorder borderline context. Now, we've all know, and I've talked about before in other shows, that these psychologists for the courts usually just do what they can just enough. And sometimes when we in the pretense with the juvenile, they won't stack a lot of psychological disorders on them. They'll try and give them a break, but afterwards, when somebody is convicted or going to trial for something much larger, like serial killing cases we've talked about before, they'll stack on the disorders. And where in this case, they just did just enough to satisfy the need to the court. Now, I'm not blaming the psychologist. I'm just saying that's just the way it is in our society right now. So, in the context of what does a serial killer look like? I mean, Todd really wouldn't have at that time met that definition. I mean, he did have a mental disorder, which could have been a key identifier, but it was just borderline personality disorder, where in fact, Todd turned out to be grandiose narcissistic. He had an unrealistic opinion of himself. In fact, he told people he felt he was too smart to be caught. Now, with that type of narcissism, there's a high self esteem and entitlement factor going on. And these type of narcissists, grandiose narcissists, are willing to exploit others for gain. They're violent, they're impulsive, and they're explosive when challenged. But they hide everything very well. They lay low, and they're, by all intents and purposes, a normal, well balanced human being until the trigger is pulled. This is why I tell people on a regular basis, when you're out in society or living your daily life and that little, what I call spidey senses, jumps off in your head, that inner voice that says, "Danger, Will Robinson," or "Hey, Jimmy, look out for this," or "Sarah, run." More often than not, we don't really listen to that inner voice because overall, people don't trust their own instincts. We are not conditioned to trust our instincts through childhood. We are told how to feel, we are told how to behave, so we, over time, lose some of our natural instinct that would, if not dampered, keep us out of trouble. Ultimately, Todd was convicted of 7 murders, but he claims that there are more out there, but he has yet to disclose any information to any of the authorities as to the names or locations of these individuals that may be out there. A lot of time, narcissists will do this. They will hold on to information so that they feel like they have something that somebody else wants, something of value. They try to do this to keep the upper hand on you or on somebody. It's a false sense of control with them. This guy led a good life. I mean, he was part of a brokerage down here that did a lot of business. They all thought very highly of Todd. Nobody had a clue that he was a psycho, messed up young man. He fit the pattern very well. And grandiose narcissists are able to do that. Hell, people with borderline personality disorder are able to construct themselves for the environment so much that they it's hard for them to get caught on polygraph because they believe everything that they say. So there's no trigger emotionally through the parasympathetic nervous system that lets anybody or any machine know that they're a bald-faced liar. So how did Todd ultimately get caught? Well, in 2015, he was linked to a superbike motorsport killing where he was the primary suspect. And then he went and recruited that couple from an apartment complex, and the apartment manager, after a few days, became concerned because she hadn't seen either one of them, and she reached out to try and get in contact with the husband, and the husband was nowhere to be found, and she knew that the last person that had seen the couple was Todd. We have to remember that Todd spent 14 years in juvenile prison, and he learned a lot of skills. And when you're in prison for that length of time, from what I understand from people that I've interviewed, not only do you learn new skills, not the best kind of skills, but you learn how to manage and plan and stay under the radar for longer periods of time so that you don't get caught. Now, consequently, that is a key characteristic to a serial killer, particularly a serial killer like Todd. Organized serial killers are skilled. They hold a job. Todd mimicked this illusion. He worked while he did criminal activity. He stayed low under the radar. Now, Todd was familiar with bombs and guns and hiding and making threats, and that's the same mode that he used as an adult. He used weapons he was familiar with. He used locations which were remote that he was familiar with, which fits in with his dad's house because the house was remote and nobody else was there. So he wasn't going to be found. His mistake with the 14-year-old girl, luckily for her, was that he did not kill her at that time. Todd was just very well organized. He was a power control orientated type killer. This is evident from his narcissistic tendencies that he had to always be in control and had dominance over his victims. There is evidence that his killings were not just based on control, but psychosocial perspectives that correspond with his experience. See, psychosocial perspectives, they tend to have the person ponder and recreate very emotional experiences from another period of time. And in Todd's youth time frame would have been in his youth. It was always volatile, very emotional. He got a lot of anger, but this anger probably transferred to a psychological high when he thought about those times, not only reinvigorating the anger, but to reignite the power that he felt over others during a period where he had no control of his life at all. Let me remind you that even though profiling is not an exact science, there are similarities that are proven to exist with many serial killers that have been properly diagnosed with narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial, and borderline personality disorder. They have also shown serial killers do not have empathy. They are charming, but they are deceitful, and they don't feel empathy like many of us do. They oftentimes play out their fantasies in a mental role playing called cognitive rehearsals. And when the idea or the fantasy no longer excites them or meets their needs, they act on those unresolved feelings and go out and kill again. We have seen in serial killers this process to repeat itself over and over. For hell's sake, the Green River Killer and the Zodiac Killer lay dormant for many years after killings, which made it more difficult to catch. Although each serial killer has similar tendencies, the triggers are different, and the reasons and their choice, the methods that they use, and the reasons that they kill are different. Some serial killers are charismatic. Todd was one of those. Remember, serial killers are unpredictable, just like you and me. Because people are so unpredictable, this makes it difficult to catch a killer. We all know in our gut how we should or shouldn't behave, and we all justify our behaviors based off of our past experiences. Serial killers are no different. They justify their behaviors based off their past experiences. Unfortunately, these past experiences manifest into an anger and revenge mode where these individuals feel like they have no other choice than to relive and take out this anger, this passion, this pain on others because they are incapable of understanding how others feel. I want to start wrapping things up, and I want you to think about this. Our society is so enthralled with serial killing and killing as a whole that we glamorize these individuals and give them the attention that they want and need via news media and shows and stories like this. And I want you to remember that just because somebody fits a particular profile or a particular diagnosis does not make them a bad person. A lot of people that could be potential killers or cause harm to people in society live good, normal lives with therapy and medications. For crying out loud, I knew a district attorney once that was personality disorder and a few other things, and he was one of the best litigators I had ever seen in my entire life. People live their lives the way they choose, and just because the news and professionals focus on mental and cognitive issues, it is used as an explanation for something that we don't understand. But it doesn't mean that everybody else that lives with those diagnoses are bad. Until next time, ladies and gentlemen, I parley you that you take care of one another, cover your six, be aware of your surroundings, and until next time, carpe diem. I want to thank you for listening once again. Before I let you go, just remember to like, share the show with your friends and family. Also, there are links on my website and in some of the descriptions, depending on the platform that you're on, that allow you to get merchandise for the show, make donations to the show, so that we can help cover our production costs. Again, thanks for listening. Take care of one another. Carpe diem.